Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of History Quest. I'm your host, Brian Haynes, and today we have a baseball special for you. I was able to go back and collect several stories about amateur baseball in McLeod County. Before I start, I want to point out one thing. Prior to the Minnesota Twins coming to Minnesota, because they used to be the Washington Senators, one of the oldest teams in the American League, and they came to Minnesota, and before that, these amateur baseball teams were basically the big league teams of the state because we had no other big league team. So if you wanted to watch some baseball, basically you went down to your local field and you watched your local boys play. And in many cases, these players were like big leaguers to kids and others who lived in those communities. So at any rate, without further ado, let's get into these stories, and I'll share some news with you in a little bit. Thank you. There's nothing like the small town baseball game. The sights, the sounds, and the smell are things that can rarely be duplicated in another setting. In Minnesota, town ball is about community, family, and tradition. Nearly every community, small and large, has at least one team that plays on the diamond once a week. It's a tradition that's been carried on for over a century, and one that looks like it will not fade away anytime soon. As popular as amateur baseball is in Minnesota, however, there was a time when the league's popularity soared much higher. In the first half of the 20th century, Major League Baseball was still largely an Eastern entity. And although people all over the country followed the sport, the teams were mainly located in eastern cities such as New York, Boston, or Pittsburgh. For those in the Midwest, specifically in Minnesota, the amateur teams were the next best thing to the major leagues, and the fans treated it as such. Today, baseball practice for an amateur team is generally something the players attend alone. But prior to the Major League Baseball coming to Minnesota, town ball practice was often attended by fans as well. Entire families would go to practice. Adults would watch as the team honed their skills, and the kids would play small pickup games of their own. To the kids, the players were often more than just fathers or brothers, but looked at as local icons, looked at as real baseball players who donned a uniform and graced the diamond every Sunday afternoon. Teams across America drafted players within their locale, yet they also reached outside of the communities and hired a few ringers who could improve their team's chances of winning at all. Teams like the Winstead Warriors did just that, hiring outside help to keep them on top of their game in Class A ball. The Winstead Warriors came to prominence in the late 1940s. They immediately signed a college pitcher from St. Thomas, Alex Romanchuk, who was one of the best pitchers in the state. In 1946, Winstead also became one of the first teams to have a ballpark equipped with lights. Millerburn Incorporated, a local manufacturer, installed the lights on the team's home field. The lights made Winstead games a popular event, and the attendance soared. Crowds of up to 3,000 fans were not unheard of, and more than once, Winstead sold out its supply of beer and had to make runs to neighboring communities to resupply their concessions. The sales and the big crowds were necessary in Winstead, as most of the players were from out of town. The big-name players like Romanchuk received game checks for $50 per game, while most were contracted for $5 to $10. All the outside help of the Winstead Warriors, though expensive, paid off. In 1948, 1949, and 1950, the Warriors qualified for the state championship, and in Class A no less. In 1948, they swept Glencoe in the playoffs, and then beat Waverly in 3 straight games for the league championship. They beat Worthington in the first game of the state tournament, and then shut down Belle Plaine in the championship game. They were favored to repeat again in 1949, but were given a beatdown by Excelsior in a score of 17-1. They were back again in 1950, but this time they fell to La Center in the championship game. As the 1950s wore on, Winstead, though still powerful, could never capture that same prowess that they had in the late 40s. Eventually, the team was moved down to Class B. Attendance began to drop rapidly, and in 1954, Winsted did not even field a team. They came back in 1958, but the powerhouse era for the Winsted Warriors was over. While Winsted was recruiting and signing big-name players from outside the city limits, other communities looked to their own people to grace the diamond. Towns like Lester Prairie or Lake Marion could not afford to pay the high salaries, so instead relied on hometown talent to win games. In an era when many town ball teams reached outside the city limits, one small community in McLeod County was able to find enough homegrown talent to not only compete, but to win it all. In 1950, Lester Prairie fielded a state championship team. A former Lester Prairie player, Bruce Burkholz, once recalled, "We had a lot of good athletes around here then. We also had some excellent pitching. We had 5 players who were capable of getting the job done." Indeed, much of Lester Prairie's success on the diamond was due to pitching. One left-hander, Doug Dibb, was one of the best pitchers in the state. Yet, the team's success wasn't delegated to just one player. In fact, Lester Prairie's talent pool was so large that they were forced to turn down several players who were top athletes and were forced to play for neighboring communities instead. With a high-caliber team, Lester Prairie reached the state amateur baseball tournament 4 times during the span of 1948 through 1953. In 1950, many in the community did not expect the hometown 9 to reach the state tournament as they finished the regular season in second place. However, the team played hard enough through the regional playoffs and upset first-place Norwood. With a few wins in their back pocket, Lester Prairie faced Ulen in the opening game of the state tournament. They beat Ulen 8-1, and in 4 games outscored their opponents 21-3 and secured the town's first and only Class B championship. People referred to the players back then as farmers in the field. Teams were most often made of farm boys who would finish chores, throw on a uniform, and head to the park. What these teams lacked in outside help, however, they made up with hometown prowess. Lester Prairie won the state championship with nothing but local players, and through much of the 1950s, the Broughton Bruins competed with a local core that consisted of Max West, Lyle and Neil Katzenmeyer, Jerry Hochsprung, and Hank Lonkerich. They often went up against much larger teams like Hutch, Glencoe, Gaylord, Arlington, and many more. But the farm kids from Broughton seemed to always hold their own. In 1958, the Broughton Bruins were particularly strong, losing only 2 games in qualifying for the state tournament with a 27-2 record. They won their first 2 games 6-0 against Little Falls and then 8-2 against Warroad. As well as the team was playing, however, they fell to Norwood in the quarterfinals and were eliminated from the tournament. In 1966, trouble struck with the Broughton Bruins. Broughton had fielded a town team since 1887, and they had a long history of quality baseball. In '66, the Bruins were playing in the High Island League, but there was a problem. Teams in the league were dropping out fast. Soon, only 2 teams were left, Broughton and Arlington. To make things worse, Arlington too dropped out and joined the Carver-Hennepin League, leaving Broughton as the only team left in the old High Island. The Bruins were in danger of being left out of the state program. That was until a small group of local baseball enthusiasts came together with a solution. Jerry Hochsprung, Max West, Lyle Katzenmeyer, and Hank Lonkerich met with Chuck Warner and devised a plan to create the Arrow Wilson League, an all-Broughton league. They created 3 more teams out of Broughton local ball players and called they created 3 more teams from Broughton locals, and all 4 called the Broughton Field home. The quality of baseball was good. All 4 teams were competitive. The Bruins, however, fielded the best talent and took home the league championship at the end of the season. The Bruins had high hopes in the state tournament that year and advanced to the finals, but were defeated by Perham by a score of 5-4. The following year, the Bruins repeated. They beat out the 3 other Broughton teams and headed to state. This time, however, they came home with their first ever state championship. As the 50s turned into the 1960s, Town ball in Minnesota began to take a slight decline in popularity when the Washington Senators made the move west and became the Minnesota Twins. Though town ball still reigned with large amounts of local admiration, the era of Minnesota's amateur big leagues had come to an end. Big names like Harmon Killebrew and Tony Oliva became the new local heroes, and the World Series was now the biggest game of them all. No one can deny, however, just how popular the town ball teams once were. It was most certainly a golden era, and one that is now part of history. It was the last game of the year in 1938, and Hutchinson looked to end it on a high note. The season was over, and the local boys from Hutch were playing for the right to call themselves state champs. They faced Maple Lake, a team looking to snatch victory away from the clutches of the Hutch team. A victory for the hometown heroes would be no easy task, however, as more than their adversaries would stand in their way on this day in 1938. Conditions were far from ideal for a ball game. Rather than sun and warmth, the weather had turned foul. The field that day was wet and sloppy, and a constant drizzle fell from the dark clouds that cast themselves over the sun. No matter the weather, the game went on as planned. Hutchinson struggled early on. The absence of light and the heavy wet ball gave the Maple Lake pitcher an advantage. Hutch found it difficult to make contact and only managed one hit. Maple Lake, on the other hand, had no trouble playing on a field that was slick and muddy. They managed 5 hits and a home run. They added 5 more hits in the 7th and seemed to have the game in hand. Hutchinson struggled in the field too. The ball was wet, and the horse hide was getting slick on the fingers and hands, making it difficult to get a good grip for a fast throw across the diamond. At one point, a Hutch outfielder made a mad dash toward a fly ball and kicked up water as he ran. There's no doubt that the conditions made it hard to play. At the end of 9 innings, the local boys came up short, and Maple Lake took home the championship with a 6-0 win. It wasn't the first game to be played in wet conditions, and it wouldn't be the last. But it was a heartbreaker for Hutchinson, who would have to wait another year and another chance to win the big one.
All right, so here we are back at the museum. We do have a few baseball artifacts on display right now, starting with this guy right here. This is actually like a Bat Boys uniform, so it would be for a kid, I don't know, say anywhere from like 7 years old to maybe 10 years old, for the Winstead Warriors. And a lot of times the Bat Boys would be just a kid or a brother from of somebody who played on the team. But at any rate, this is one of them, probably from about the late 40s, early 50s, something like that. It still has the baggy uniform, but it's cotton instead of wool, so it's a little bit newer. In the display case, we have several items baseball related. If you look in the back, we have trophies from Legion teams, which is basically like high school aged kids that are, you know, not quite playing in amateur ball yet, but are playing in Legion ball after the high school season's over. Here is a ball that's been signed years ago at the end of the season. A lot of times every player on the team would sign the ball, and it'd be given to the manager or maybe given to a bat boy or something of that sort. Here again, we have a ball that's been signed, and this is signed by the Lester Prairie American Legion team. And there again, all their signatures are on there. Here's a very well-used ball. A couple others, got some softballs in there, some more Legion trophies. A couple of gloves. We don't have anything that's really old. This one is probably from the late 60s, maybe even into the 70s already. And then here we have like a youth glove. This would be probably from about the 50s. And you can see whoever owned it had their name on it, and it's been repaired in a few places. This one's kind of neat. So this is a wooden bat, and this was used by the Bear Lake baseball team. It was owned by Milburn Hinkey, and It's a much bigger bat, so this would have been used probably prior to the 1930s. So maybe at the turn of the century, into the 20s, maybe into the 30s. But they used to use quite a bit bigger of a bat with a much bigger base to it. And the bats were heavier. And it was, you know, this is what they would have used in what's called the dead ball era, where they didn't have as much, fewer home runs, fewer hard hits, a lot more bunts, a lot more base hits, a lot more defense into the game. It's kind of neat about this one is if you look in here, it's been corked. So Milburn Hinkey, I don't know if he was a good ball player or not, but he was getting a little bit of help back when he was playing. So this, of course, is just a novelty bat that kids would get at games. And then here we have a few pictures too. So this is the Elmwood baseball team, 1928. And you'll notice a lot of them, they're not by a field, and that's because a lot of times in those days the field would just be a pasture or maybe an athletic field, a dirt field by a school, or a lot of times they were by a railroad track. The opposing team often would come in on the train, and so they would just have the field would be right there off of the train depot or somewhere near the track. Here is Glencoe, and you can see if you look on here, they have the the sponsors. So what do we got? Glencoe Bag Company, Bank of Glencoe, Glencoe Enterprise. You may have heard of that. First National Bank. So instead of having the team name on there, they would actually put the sponsor right on top. And here's a Hutch team. This would be 1920 era or 1920s era. And here we have Lake Jenny. And here, as you can see, they would draft players. Well, they still do that. When you get into the tournament, you could draft a player from another team who's not playing anymore and have them come in. Here we have the Plato Maroons. I think now we have the Plato Blue Jays, but at one time it was the Plato Maroons. Champions of McLeod County in 1907. So this is a very old picture. And here we have the 1904 Bear Lake baseball team. So that would be where the bat came from. Here they have their names on the jerseys, but you can imagine what it must have been like on a summer day when it's 90 degrees plus, wearing a long sleeved wool shirt to play baseball. That's about what we have for baseball artifacts here. We have many pictures. But as far as artifacts, they're always kind of hard to come from, those vintage baseball artifacts. The baseball guys don't like to give them up, and I know I got a few myself. So.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed those stories. I certainly did. But then, of course, I've always been a big baseball nut. So anyway, I wanted to just kind of let you know what's going on in the museum during this month of August. We will be at the fair, at the McLeod County Fair. Kind of different than normal though, because we really didn't have time to plan because of COVID, and we didn't really know what the schedule was going to be like. So we're not going to have a booth at the fair. In past years we had a dunk tank. We look to probably resume that again next year or something like it. But for this year, we will be on the Legacy stage, or I should say I'll be on the Legacy stage. I'll be talking about the book that I put out along with the museum called Where the Big Woods Meet the Prairie. And it's a collection of short stories that have appeared in the Hutchinson Leader and the McLeod County Chronicle, and they kind of just span the history of McLeod County. So I'll be talking about the book on the stage a little bit, as well as sharing some museum news at that time. Also on August 23rd at 10:30, we will be having our breakfast club. For those who don't know, our breakfast club is a chance for members of the museum to come down to the museum, and we offer free coffee and donuts, and we usually have some kind of a round table discussion, or we'll have a guest speaker come in. And for the month of August, we will be talking about the grasshopper plagues of the 1870s. So I know there's a lot of farmers who like to come to these events, and so this should be a good one. We're talking about the grasshoppers. And again, that is at 10:30 a.m. on Monday, August 23rd. Also, I just want to remind everybody that our new edition is finished. the museum is open, and we've actually seen a real big uptick in visitors this year, which is a good thing. A lot of that can probably be attributed to our new exhibit in the back, our Vern and Alice Steffel wing that has been opened this year. It's all agriculturally based, so that's kind of our ag section of the museum, along with some Vern Steffel, our donor, some of his artifacts. We've got a big Whoopie John display because he led the band, the Whoopie John band, and as well as some of the things he built and invented. And then also we have installed a new exhibit in the existing exhibit hall, or our old exhibit hall, and that is a saloon display, which is kind of neat. And then one last thing about our exhibit hall, we're starting to put some QR codes around, so you can go in, and if you have an app that reads QR codes, you can scan the app and it'll lead you to a story, about that exhibit, or related to that exhibit, or maybe a video or pictures or something like that. So kind of exciting, pretty fun. But that's kind of what we got going on right now at the museum, but definitely stay tuned, as you never know what's gonna happen or what we're gonna be doing next. So that is our show for you this month. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you tune in again next month for some new exciting stuff on History Quest. Thanks, everybody.